Elena dropped the glass. It shattered on the marble floor with a crash so violent that her heart lurched into her throat. Her hand shook uncontrollably. The wedding band, still warm from the ceremony, pressed against her skin like a brand she could not yet remove. She flattened her palm against her chest, as though sheer pressure might silence the frantic, wild beating inside her ribcage. Someone was crying upstairs. Not the soft, restrained sobbing of exhaustion or distant memory. This was raw, broken, gasping, real, human anguish that clawed its way through the quiet house. And it was not coming from her. She stood paralyzed in the wide, dimly lit hallway of the house that was supposed to become their first shared home. 6 months earlier, she and Daniel had walked these same rooms hand in hand, laughing, pointing out where the Christmas tree would stand each December, where children might one day play with wooden blocks on rainy afternoons, where quiet Sunday mornings would unfold with coffee steaming between them and newspapers spread across the kitchen island. Those dreams now felt obscene, almost mocking in their innocence. The night refused to be quiet, and Daniel was nowhere to be found. "Hello?" Her voice trembled despite her desperate attempt to force steadiness into it. The crying stopped instantly. Silence flooded in so complete and sudden that her ears rang with the absence of sound. She took one cautious step forward, then another. Shards of glass bit into the soles of her bare feet. She barely registered the sharp sting. A cold dread spread through her stomach, like spilled ink, slow and irreversible. Then a whisper drifted down the staircase, low, urgent, unmistakable. "Don't come up here." It was Daniel's voice. Her knees nearly buckled beneath her. 6 hours earlier she had still been laughing. That laughter hurt most when she remembered it later. Bright, careless, full of a joy she could no longer reach. She had stood in a hotel bridal suite, the heavy ivory veil already discarded on the chaise lounge, her dark hair loosening from its elegant updo after hours of dancing under golden chandeliers. Her cheeks ached pleasantly from too much smiling. Her feet throbbed in that satisfying way only true happiness could excuse. "You did it," Laura, her maid of honor and oldest friend, had said, wrapping both arms around her from behind in a fierce hug. "You're married, Elena. Actually married." "I'm married," Elena repeated, staring at the stranger in the full-length mirror, the woman wearing rumpled silk and a dazed, radiant smile that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. Her phone buzzed against her palm. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. "I'll meet you at the house. Just need to take care of one last thing." She frowned, brows knitting together. "One last thing?" Laura noticed a shift in expression immediately. "What's wrong?" "Your smile just disappeared." "Nothing," Elena said too quickly, locking the screen with a swipe. "Just wedding logistics. You know how he is." Laura rolled her eyes with fond exasperation. Man, even on their wedding day they find something to fix or arrange or obsess over. Elena laughed again, bright, easy, careless. She wished later that she had paused to examine the tiny knot of unease that tightened beneath her ribs, the faint warning she dismissed because nothing, absolutely nothing, was allowed to tarnish the perfection of the night. If she had known what waited at the end of that long drive, she would have gathered the heavy folds of her dress, kicked off the painful heels, grabbed Lara's hand, and run. The drive to the new house felt unnaturally long, as though the city itself stretched the distance. Golden city lights smeared past the window in long, liquid streaks. Her heels lay abandoned on the passenger seat beside her small clutch purse. A love song drifted from the radio, something earnest and swelling about eternal promises and never letting go. She stabbed the power button with more force than necessary, silencing it mid-chorus. She called him, straight to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. "He's probably just delayed," she murmured to the empty car, fingers tightening on the steering wheel until her knuckles paled. "Relax, Elena. It's your wedding night. Everything is fine." The knot in her stomach refused to loosen. If anything, it tightened, twisting like a rope being slowly pulled. When she turned in the driveway, the house loomed dark except for the single porch light burning like a lonely beacon against the night. No car in the garage. No flicker of movement behind the tall, elegant windows, only silence and long, stretching shadows. She sat motionless for a full minute, keys dangling from numb fingers, suddenly afraid, irrationally, childishly afraid, to cross the threshold. Ridiculous, she told herself sharply. She was a bride of only a few hours, not a frightened child scared of the dark. She opened the car door. The house smelled faintly of fresh paint, roses from the afternoon's floor deliveries, and something else, something metallic and indefinable that made the hair on the back of her neck rise. The movers had left weeks earlier. Furniture sat perfectly arranged yet strangely lifeless, like a high-end showroom pretending at intimacy. Couches still wore their plastic covers in places. Bookshelves stood empty except for a few decorative hardcovers placed at artful angles. "Daniel?" Her voice echoed slightly off the high ceilings. Silence answered. She slipped off her shoes, set her purse on the console table in the foyer. Excitement ebbed slowly, replaced by a creeping confusion that settled in her chest. She checked her phone again. No new messages. She typed quickly, "I'm here. Are you okay?" She moved through the living room, then the kitchen, open plan, modern, exactly as they had chosen together. Everything remained precisely as they had left it that morning. Glasses stacked neatly, counters wiped to a shine, flowers still fresh in their crystal vases. Except for one detail that caught her eye and refused to let go. The door at the far end of the upstairs hallway was closed. Locked. That door had unsettled her from the very beginning. Months ago, during their first walkthrough after closing on the house, curiosity had drawn her hand to the knob. Daniel had intercepted her instantly, his fingers closing over hers with unexpected firmness. "Don't," he'd said, sharper than necessary. She'd laughed, assuming it was a joke. What, a monster in there? A secret lair? He hadn't smiled. "The room isn't ready yet. Please don't go in." His tone had been final enough, almost pleading, that she nodded and let the matter drop without pressing. Now, alone in the hushed house, she stared at that same door and felt the old unease slither up her spine once more, colder this time, more insistent. She changed out of the wedding dress slowly, reverently, folding the heavy silk as though it might tear if handled too roughly. She sat on the edge of the mattress in her slip, hugging her knees to her chest, watching minutes crawl across her phone screen like reluctant insects. 10:14 p.m., 10:27 p.m., 10:46 p.m. She called again. Voicemail. "Hey," she said, forcing a lightness she no longer felt into her tone. "You're officially late to our wedding night. Call me back when you can." She ended the recording and curled tighter into herself. This was not how the night was meant to unfold. They were supposed to be laughing together on the oversized couch downstairs, ordering room service champagne from the hotel they had originally planned to stay in, marveling at how surreal it felt to finally wear matching rings after 3 years of promises. Instead, she waited alone in a house that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something she could not name. At 11:30 p.m., a dull thud sounded from upstairs. She froze. "Daniel?" Nothing. She told herself it was a house settling. Old beams contracting in the January chill. Cooling pipes shifting. Her imagination running wild after too much champagne and too little sleep. Then it came again. A slow, deliberate dragging sound, like heavy furniture being pulled across the floorboards with careful, measured effort. Midnight arrived with a soft, almost apologetic click of the microwave clock in the kitchen. And that was when the crying truly began. A woman's voice, hoarse, exhausted, as though she had been weeping for hours without reprieve. "No," the voice whispered between ragged sobs. "You said she wouldn't be here." Elena's heart slammed against her ribs, so hard she thought it might bruise them from the inside. She? The single word echoed in her skull, like a gunshot in an empty room. She took one tentative step toward the staircase, her breath coming shallow and fast. "Hello?" she whispered, barely loud enough to carry. The crying sharpened, grew louder, more desperate. Then another voice joined, Daniel's. Low, angry, desperate. "Keep your voice down," he hissed. "You're going to ruin everything." Ruin everything. The phrase landed like a slap. Elena's fingers closed around the smooth, cold banister as she climbed the first step, her legs trembling beneath her. That was when he shouted, "Don't come up here." She stopped dead on the stair, one hand gripping the rail, so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her throat burned with unshed tears and rising panic. "Daniel?" Her voice cracked on his name. "What's happening up there?" Silence swallowed the house again, thick and suffocating. Then footsteps, quick, heavy, urgent. The locked door at the end of the hallway rattled violently, as though someone had thrown their full weight against it in sudden, frantic rebellion. Elena retreated one step downward, legs shaking so badly she feared they would give out. "Who is she?" she called, louder now, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Why is there someone else in our house on our wedding night?" No answer came. The crying dissolved into wrenching, guttural sobs, closer, more frantic, as though the woman behind the door could sense Elena's presence and it terrified her. Elena backed fully into the hallway below, chest tight, mind racing through every terrible possibility she had tried so hard to keep at bay. A mistress hidden away? A secret child from a previous life? Something far darker, far more broken? Her phone buzzed sharply in her hand. A message from Daniel. "Please don't panic. I can explain." Tears blurred the screen, turning the words into smeared light. Explain what? Another text arrived almost immediately. "Just trust me. Stay downstairs." That was when the lock clicked, sharp, deliberate. The upstairs door eased open slowly, only halfway, as though whoever stood behind it feared full exposure more than anything in the world. A thin, harsh blade of yellow light sliced across the carpet, cutting the darkness like a warning. Elena couldn't draw a full breath. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out everything else. "Daniel," she managed, voice barely more than a thread of air. "Please." For several agonizing seconds, nothing moved. Then his face appeared in the narrow gap between door and frame. He looked nothing like the groom she had kissed under strings of fairy lights only hours earlier, surrounded by family and friends and champagne toasts. His hair was wild, disheveled. His tie was gone. His eyes were bloodshot and frantic with something that looked dangerously close to terror. Not for her safety, but for his own exposure, his own unraveling. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, almost pleading. A laugh tore from Elena, sharp, jagged, completely wrong. "I live here," she answered, voice rising despite herself. "I married you today. Where else should I be?" He swallowed hard, glanced over his shoulder into the room behind him. Another small, panicked sniffle sounded, followed by a sharp, shuddering inhale, as though the woman inside fought desperately to stifle another wave of tears. "Daniel," Elena said, her voice shaking harder now. "Who is she?" He stepped fully into the hallway and pulled the door closed behind him with careful, deliberate force. The lock snapped shut again, the metallic click echoing through the silent house like a gunshot. "She's family," he said at last, the word sounding heavy and wrong in his mouth. The word landed like a stone dropped into deep water. "Family?" Elena repeated slowly. "What kind of family cries like that in the middle of the night and says I wasn't supposed to be here?" He dragged a hand through his already messy hair, breath unsteady. "Please, just sit down. Let me explain." She remained rooted where she stood. "No," she said. "You disappeared on our wedding night. You left me alone for hours. And now there's a woman locked behind a door upstairs in the house we bought together. You don't get to tell me to sit." His jaw clenched visibly. For a heartbeat she thought anger would flare in his eyes. Instead, his shoulders sagged, as though the weight of the moment had finally crushed something inside him. "I never wanted you to find out like this," he said, voice low and rough. Her stomach plummeted. "Find out what?" she demanded. He hesitated, mouth working silently for a moment. He glanced back at the locked door as though it might offer him an escape. "She's my sister," he said finally. Elena blinked, stunned. That answer had not been anywhere on the list of horrors her mind had been spinning. "You told me you were an only child," she said slowly, each word careful measured. "I was protecting her." The words came too fast, too practiced. "She's sick." The word hung between them, fragile, inadequate, wrong. "Sick how?" she pressed, refusing to let him slide away from the truth. "She has episodes, breakdowns. She can't be left alone." His voice cracked on the last word. Pieces refused to fit together cleanly. Elena's mind snagged on the woman's earlier, terrified words. "You said she wouldn't be here. Why didn't you tell me?" Elena asked, voice rising again. Why keep her locked away like some shameful secret? He flinched as though she had struck him. "Because people don't understand," he said quietly. "They judge. They assume the worst. They take her away." "And you thought marrying me without a single word was better?" Her voice cracked with bitterness. "I was going to tell you," he insisted, stepping closer. "After the wedding, when things were calmer, when I knew you wouldn't run." "Things are never calm when you build them on secrets," she said. Another broken sob leaked through the door, louder this time, closer to hysteria. "Daniel," the woman whimpered. "Please, I can hear her. She's angry." He turned sharply toward the door. "I told you to stay quiet." The sudden snap at his tone sent fresh ice through Elena's veins. "That doesn't sound like protection," she said quietly, dangerously. "That sounds like control." He swung back to face her, eyes wide with something close to panic. "You don't understand what I've been carrying alone for years," he said. "Then help me understand," she answered, stepping forward. "Because right now I feel like I married a complete stranger." He hesitated, then exhaled a long, defeated breath that seemed to come from the bottom of his soul. "Her name is Mara. She's 3 years older than me." The name struck Elena like a physical blow. He had mentioned Mara once. Only once, very early in their dating days. "My sister used to say that too," he muttered during a small disagreement about weekend plans, then immediately changed the subject with a forced laugh. "You told me she moved overseas," Elena said, voice flat. "She did. For a while." "For how long exactly?" He didn't answer. Elena crossed her arms tightly across her chest, trying to anchor herself against the rising tide of betrayal. "Daniel, look at me. I need the truth. All of it." He finally met her gaze, and for the first time since he had appeared in the doorway, she saw real pain in his eyes. "She came back 2 months ago," he admitted. 2 months. The timeline hit her hard. "You hit her here," Elena said, voice trembling. "She had nowhere else to go," he replied quickly. "Hospitals failed her. Family turned their backs. I couldn't abandon her. Not after everything." "So you hid her from your fiancé?" The words tasted bitter. "I didn't hide her," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I postponed telling you." She let out a short, humorless laugh that echoed strangely in the hallway. "You postponed telling me a grown woman was living secretly in the house we were going to call home?" "She stays in her room," he rushed on. "She doesn't interact with anyone. I take care of everything, food, medication, everything." "And tonight?" Elena asked, "Why tonight of all nights?" He looked away, shame creeping across his features. "She had an episode earlier today," he said. "She panicked when she realized you were moving in permanently tonight." Elena's chest constricted painfully. "Because she thought I wouldn't be here," she said slowly, the realization sinking in like cold water. He didn't deny it. Silence stretched between them, thick, heavy, suffocating. "So the plan was what exactly?" she asked, voice dangerously calm now. "Ease me into it after the honeymoon? Surprise. By the way, my mentally unstable sister lives behind a locked door upstairs and has been here the whole time we were planning our future." His face crumpled. "I love you," he said desperately, reaching for her. "I didn't want to lose you." She stepped back, avoiding his hand. "You didn't trust me," she said quietly. "That's not." "You trusted me enough to marry me," she cut in, voice rising again. but not enough to let me choose whether I wanted this life, with all of its secrets and shadows. Another broken sob broke through the door. Mara, Daniel called softly, almost tenderly. It's okay. I'm handling it. Elena took a single step toward the door. He immediately moved to block her path. No, he said, firm, final, almost pleading. The single word chilled her to the bone. What are you afraid I'll see if I go in there? She asked. She's not well, he repeated, voice cracking. Let me decide that for myself, Elena said. I deserve to know who else lives in my house. He shook his head slowly. Not tonight. Not like this. Then when, Daniel? She demanded. When would it ever have been the right time to tell me the truth? He opened his mouth to answer, and the door behind him slammed violently from the inside. The impact rattled the frame and sent a tremor through the floorboards. Mara, he shouted, spinning toward the door. The lock rattled furiously, though it shuddered as though she were throwing herself against it again and again. Let me out, she screamed, voice raw and breaking. You promise. Elena's heart raced so violently she could feel it in her throat. She's been locked in there? The horror in her voice was unmistakable. It's for her own safety, Daniel insisted, his tone desperate now, almost pleading. Whose safety? She shot back, voice rising. Hers or yours? The screams turned to raw, gut-wrenching wailing that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Please, Mara cried from inside, her voice cracking with terror. I can't breathe. She's here. She's going to take you away from me. Elena felt nausea rise in a sickening wave. She thinks I'm stealing you, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. She doesn't think rationally when she's like this, Daniel said quickly. The episodes make everything distorted. She sees threats where there are none. Neither do people who lie for months on end, Elena snapped, anger finally overtaking fear. She reached for the lock, fingers trembling but determined. Daniel caught her wrist, hard enough to make her gasp. Don't, he warned, eyes wild. She wrenched her hand free, with a sharp twist. Don't touch me. They stared at each other across the sudden, unbridgeable gulf that had opened between them. Years of shared laughter, quiet mornings, whispered promises evaporating in seconds. Open the door, Elena said, voice low and dangerous. No. Open the door. She doesn't need to see you, he said. It will make everything worse for her, for all of us. And what about what I need? Elena asked, tears burning behind her eyes. What about the truth I'm entitled to? He offered no reply. That silence told her more than any confession ever could. The crying quieted suddenly. Too suddenly. Elena held her breath, ears straining. Mara, Daniel said cautiously, turning toward the door. No response. Then, in a calm, eerily composed voice that sent fresh goosebumps racing across Elena's arms, Mara spoke from behind the wood. She doesn't know everything, does she? Daniel froze, every muscle in his body going rigid. What are you talking about? He asked tightly. A soft, chilling laugh drifted out, slow, deliberate. Did you tell her why I really can't leave? Mara asked, her tone unnervingly steady now. Dizziness washed over Elena in a sickening rush. Daniel, she whispered. What is she talking about? His face drained of all color. Mara, he snapped, voice cracking. Stop. Right now. Why don't you tell her? Mara continued, ignoring him completely. Tell her what you did. Tell her why this house isn't really hers. Elena's pulse roared in her ears like a freight train. What did you do? She demanded, stepping closer to him. He shook his head violently, backing away from the door as though it might burn him. This isn't the time, he said. When is it ever the time to tell the truth? Elena shouted, voice breaking. Mara laughed again, sharper, colder, more certain. You married him without knowing, she said through the door. Just like I warned you. Warn me about what? Elena's voice cracked on the last word. You should ask him about the last woman who lived here, Mara answered softly. The air left Elena's lungs in a painful rush. Daniel, she whispered, barely able to form words. Who was the last woman who lived in this house? He couldn't look at her. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even breathe properly. And in that terrible, suspended moment, Elena understood that the hidden sister was only the beginning of a much deeper, much darker nightmare. The silence after Mara's words felt physical, crushing, suffocating, as though the house itself leaned in, waiting to see what would happen next. The last woman? Elena repeated slowly, each syllable careful, deliberate, like walking across thin ice. Daniel, answer me. He looked physically ill, face pale, eyes glassy, skin slick with sudden sweat. His mouth opened, closed again. His gaze darted frantically between Elena and the locked door, like a man pinned between two collapsing walls with no escape. Mara, stop, he rasped. You're confusing her. You're making this worse. I'm not, Mara replied, calm and certain. I'm helping her. Someone has to. Helping. The word twisted in Elena's gut like a knife. Daniel, she said, taking a step closer to him. If you don't tell me the truth right now, everything, I will never believe another word that comes out of your mouth. Ever. He exhaled shakily, pressed his forehead against the wall, as though he could hide there forever. She was my wife, he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. The hallway tilted violently. Elena grabbed the back of the nearest couch to keep from falling. Your what? She breathed. My first wife, he said. Her name was Elise. Something inside Elena tore open, sharp, irreversible. You told me you'd never been married, she said slowly. You told me I was your first. You looked me in the eye and said it. I didn't think it mattered anymore, he said weakly. It was over. She was gone. It matters because I married a liar, she snapped, voice shaking with fury. I married someone who built our entire relationship on lies. Mara laughed softly from behind the door, gentle, almost pitying. She lived here, Mara continued, in this house, in the same bedroom you're supposed to sleep in tonight, on the same bed. Bile rose in Elena's throat. Stop, she pleaded. Please stop talking. You deserve to know, Mara said gently. She thought she was safe, too. She thought love would protect her. Elena rounded on Daniel, rage and terror braiding together in her chest until she could barely breathe. What happened to her? She demanded. He squeezed his eyes shut as though the question physically hurt. She left, he said. Mara scoffed audibly. That's not what the police report says, she said. Elena's heart stuttered to a painful stop. Police? She whispered. Daniel snapped his head toward the door. You promised you wouldn't bring that up. She promised she wouldn't marry a stranger, Mara returned without hesitation. Elena felt cold to her very marrow, cold and numb. What police report? She asked, voice barely audible. Daniel finally looked at her, really looked, and the guilt in his eyes was unmistakable, raw, almost unbearable. She disappeared, he said quietly, 3 years ago. Disappeared. The word rang like a scream trapped beneath deep water. And you expect me to believe that has nothing to do with this? Elena asked, voice trembling. I loved her, he said quickly, desperately. Just like I love you. Don't, she cut him off sharply. Don't you dare say that to me. Mara's voice softened, almost tender now. He didn't mean to hurt her, she said through the door. Things simply got out of control. Elena turned toward the door, tears streaming freely now. Mara, she said slowly, what happened to Elise? A long, heavy pause. Then the answer came. She found out the truth, Mara said, just like you are now. Elena's knees nearly gave way beneath her. What truth? She asked. That Daniel doesn't let people leave once they truly belong to him. Daniel exploded. That's enough, he roared, voice cracking with fury. You're sick. You're twisting everything. Mara laughed, sharper, more brittle, more certain. Am I? She asked. Or are you just terrified she'll try what Elise tried? Elena's ears rang with the force of her own heartbeat. "Tried what?" she asked. Daniel lunged toward the door. "Stop talking." Elena screamed his name. "Daniel!" He froze, hand hovering inches from the lock, trembling. "Answer me," Elena said, voice deadly quiet. "Try to do what?" Mara's voice dropped to a near whisper. "She tried to leave." The hallway spun violently. Elena stumbled backward, shoulder striking the wall hard enough to bruise. Memories surged through her mind, small moments she had explained away for years. Daniel always wanted to know exactly where she was every hour of every day. Daniel quietly discouraging her from maintaining close friendships, saying they didn't understand us. Daniel murmuring, "I just worry about you always," his voice soft but insistent. She had called it love. It had never been love. "Daniel," she said quietly, terrible realization settling over her like ice. "Did you hurt her?" "No," he answered instantly, too instantly. "I would never." "Then why was there a police report?" she asked. "She was unstable," he said. "Just like Mara, she made accusations. Wild ones." Mara slammed her palm against the inside of the door, hard. "You locked her in this room too," she screamed. "Just like you lock me. Just like you'll lock her." Elena felt the air leave her body completely. "You locked your wife in here?" she asked, voice hollow. "She was a danger to herself," he insisted, voice rising. "She was spiraling. I was trying to help her." "And when she disappeared?" Elena pressed, relentless now. His silence roared louder than any denial ever could. "She didn't disappear," Mara said softly. "She fell." "Fell? Fell where?" Elena whispered. Mara waited a single, agonizing beat. Then she asked a question of her own. "Did you notice the new concrete in the backyard?" Ice flooded Elena's veins, cold and final. The backyard. Daniel had insisted on repaving the entire patio last year. He called it a fresh start, a clean slate, something about new beginnings. "You're lying," Elena said weakly. "Go look," Mara replied, "if you're brave enough." Daniel turned to Elena, panic blazing in his eyes like wildfire. "Don't listen to her," he said urgently. "She's manipulating you. She's always done this. Twisted things, made me the villain." "Then unlock the door," Elena answered, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Let me see her. Let me hear it from her." "No." Something inside Elena snapped, clean, decisive, irreversible. She shoved past him with surprising force and ran downstairs, feet pounding on the hardwood. "Stop!" he shouted, chasing after her. "Please, Elena, don't do this." She snatched her phone as she ran, fingers trembling so violently she nearly dropped it twice. The back door was locked. Of course it was. He always locked it at night, said it was for safety. "Open it," she demanded, spinning to face him. He grabbed her arm, hard. "You're not thinking clearly," he said, voice low and urgent. She twisted violently free. "I'm thinking clearer than I ever have in my life." She punched the alarm code into the panel, muscle memory from watching him enter it countless times over the past months. The system chirped once, disarmed. She flung the door open and stumbled into the cold January night air. Motion sensor lights flared to life instantly, washing the entire backyard in harsh, unforgiving white. The concrete patio stretched smooth and perfect across the entire space. Too smooth, too perfect, too new. Elena walked forward slowly, each step heavier than the last. There, Mara's voice floated down from an open upstairs window, faint but clear. Near the edge, by the rose bushes. Elena knelt. Her breath hitched painfully. A faint hairline crack marred the otherwise flawless surface, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. She pressed her palm to the concrete. It felt colder there, unnaturally so. "You didn't," she whispered. Daniel stood framed in the open doorway behind her, silhouetted against the warm light from inside. "She was already gone," he said quietly, voice breaking. By the time anyone asked questions, it was too late. Elena turned slowly, tears streaming unchecked down her face. "You killed her," she said. "No," he answered, shaking his head. "I loved her." "You don't do this to people you love," she told him. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint at first, then growing louder. She hadn't even realized her thumb had pressed 911 during the frantic run downstairs. Daniel's eyes widened in shock and sudden fear. "What did you do?" he asked, voice cracking. "I chose myself," Elena said simply. The sirens grew louder, closer, red and blue lights beginning to paint the night sky. Upstairs, Mara screamed, not in terror, in relief. "He can't hurt anyone else now," she cried, voice raw with years of pent-up anguish. Daniel backed away slowly, hands raised as though in surrender. "You don't understand what you've done," he said. "Oh," Elena answered, voice steady for the first time since the glass had shattered hours earlier. "I understand perfectly." Red and blue lights flooded the backyard in pulsing waves, turning the smooth concrete into a surreal, flickering stage. Officers rushed through the open back door, voices sharp and professional, hands on holsters until the situation clarified. Daniel dropped to his knees on the cold patio, hands raised slowly, palms open in a gesture that looked rehearsed. For the first time since the day they met, he looked small, diminished, almost fragile. But as two officers pulled him to his feet and clicked cold metal cuffs around his wrists, he twisted just enough to meet Elena's eyes one last time. And he smiled. A small, slow, knowing smile that sent fresh ice through her veins. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't fear. It was the smile of a man who still believed he owned some hidden piece of her that no handcuffs or sirens could ever touch. That smile haunted her more than the screams, more than the flashing lights, more than the moment the officers led him away into the night. The police moved with practiced efficiency after that. Flashlights carved through every dark corner of the house, exposing every lie that had festered inside those walls long before Elena ever crossed the threshold. Officers spoke in low, calm voices into radios. Evidence markers appeared like sudden constellations on the floor, plastic bags filled with items she didn't want to identify. She sat on the back steps wrapped in a scratchy gray blanket an officer had draped over her shoulders. Her teeth chattered violently, but the cold came from somewhere deeper than the January air. A female officer crouched in front of her, notepad in hand, expression gentle. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" Elena opened her mouth. For a terrible, disorienting second, she couldn't remember who she was anymore. I'm his wife," she said finally. The word tasted like poison on her tongue. The officer nodded with quiet compassion. "We'll take care of you. You're safe now." Safe. She watched them lead Daniel past her again. He didn't resist. He didn't shout. He walked with calm, measured steps, as though he had rehearsed this exact moment too many times to count. As he passed, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. "You should have stayed upstairs." She flinched as though slapped. An officer shoved him forward roughly. "Eyes ahead. Keep moving." The words lingered anyway, burrowing under her skin. They brought Mara down next. Two female officers supported her carefully as she descended the stairs, one on each side. She was thinner than Elena had imagined, gaunt, almost translucent. Her pale skin looked paper-thin in the harsh light. Her hair hung unevenly around her face, clearly cut by someone without a mirror or much care. Mara's eyes found Elena the moment she reached the bottom step. Elena stood on unsteady legs. Neither woman spoke at first. Then Mara said, voice soft and trembling, "I'm sorry." Elena had no words ready. "I tried to warn her," Mara continued, tears welling again. "I tried to warn Elise too. They never listen. They always think love will protect them." Elena's chest ached with something too complicated to name. She stepped forward before she could second-guess the impulse and pulled Mara into her arms. Mara sobbed against her shoulder, deep, wrenching cries that sounded as though they had been held inside for years, decades perhaps. "They're taking me to the hospital," Mara whispered after a long moment. "They say I need real help this time, not just locks. You do, Elena answered softly, stroking the other woman's tangled hair. And that's okay. That's more than okay. Mara drew back and looked at Elena with eyes that carried far too many shadows for one lifetime. He'll tell them it was all me, she warned quietly. He always does. He's very good at it. I won't let him, Elena promised, voice steady. Mara offered a sad, fragile smile that didn't reach her eyes. He's very convincing. The days that followed melted into one long, exhausting blur. Statements, interviews, photographs, evidence bags labeled with clinical precision. They broke open the concrete in the backyard under floodlights and careful documentation. They found Elise. The news reports were careful at first. Human remains discovered beneath suburban property in quiet residential neighborhood. But Elena knew. She knew the moment the detective's voice gentled over the phone when he called to inform her. He claims he didn't mean to, the detective told her later in a small, windowless interview room that smelled of stale coffee. Said she fell during an argument. Said it was an accident. Said he panicked. And do you believe him? Elena asked, staring at the scarred metal table between them. The detective met her gaze steadily. No, he said simply, but he believes himself. That's somehow worse. That was worse, Elena agreed silently. She testified 3 months later. By then the house stood boarded and silent. Yellow police tape still fluttering in the wind like forgotten party streamers. Wedding photos had vanished into evidence boxes. The ring rested at the bottom of a dresser drawer in her temporary apartment like a relic from a crime she had barely escaped. Daniel sat across the courtroom in orange, looking calm, clean, almost handsome again. The same careful haircut, the same measured posture. That terrified her more than any display of anger ever could. The prosecutor asked the careful, practiced questions. Did you know your husband had been previously married? No. Did he ever tell you another woman had lived in the house? No. Did he ever restrict your movements, your relationships, your freedom? She swallowed hard. Yes. Daniel's lawyer stood quickly. Objection. Character assassination. Overruled. Elena continued, voice steady now. He said it was love, she told the silent courtroom. He said it was protection, but it was control. And I didn't recognize it until it was almost too late. Daniel watched her the entire time. Not with rage. Not with fear. With something closer to pride. As though she were performing exactly the role he had written for her all along. That night, after court, she vomited in the courthouse bathroom until her stomach cramped, then cried until breathing hurt. The letter arrived a week after the verdict. Life without parole. No possibility of release. She thought the chapter had finally closed. She was wrong. No return address. Just her name and handwriting she knew too well. Neat, precise, familiar. She almost left the envelope unopened. Almost. A single page inside. You always wanted the truth. Now you have it, but you still don't know everything. Her hand shook violently. Mara wasn't the first. Elise wasn't the second. And you weren't meant to be the last. She stopped breathing. Some people leave marks. Others leave legacies. She dropped the paper as though it burned her skin. Sleep did not come that night, nor the next. She returned to the house one final time. Not alone. The detective met her there with a small forensic team re-examining old permits, renovation records, previous ownership chains that stretched back further than she had ever imagined. There were inconsistencies, he explained quietly as they walked the empty rooms. Multiple sealed-off spaces over the years. Foundations patched and repoured. Rooms that appeared and disappeared in the building plans. The locked upstairs room had not been the first. It had been the third. They found traces in the walls, beneath floorboards, names Elena had never heard, women who had lived quietly in the house for short periods before vanishing without trace. Daniel had not begun with Elise. He had practiced, perfected. The house had never been a home. It had been a system. 6 months later, Elena moved across the country. New city, new name, carefully rebuilt life with new routines, new friends who knew only the surface of her story. People sometimes asked, gently, curiously, why she never remarried. She told them the truth. I learned what love isn't. Mara wrote occasionally from the long-term care facility, where she slowly recovered. Therapy, medication, real support instead of locked doors and whispered promises. He doesn't have power over me anymore, Mara wrote once in careful, strengthening handwriting. Or over you. Elena kept the letter in her wallet like a talisman. Late at night, she sometimes woke suddenly, convinced she heard crying drifting down from somewhere above. She would sit up in the dark, heart hammering, straining to listen. There was only silence. And then she remembered. She was no longer trapped. The house still stood, though, empty, waiting, boarded windows staring blindly at the street. Because secrets do not die when their keepers are caged. They wait patiently for someone new to listen. And Elena had listened.